Welcome to Founders Forum. My name is Executive Trustee David Renty. When we were younger, do you remember adults encouraging you to accumulate all the property that you could afford? It was the way to financial stability, is what they said. Well, today the Founders Forum discussion takes a different twist for our new listeners and a refresher course for you veterans. I tell you what, just get your most comfortable chair and for the next 30 minutes discover the secret to peace of mind with today's Founders Forum discussion centering on ownership versus control. Now here's CMI founder and executive trustee, Mr. James E. Aldrich Jr.
As always, I'm extremely excited to be back with you once again, and I couldn't think of a more fitting discussion after the last tape in our series that you just enjoyed, our mission statement. That was a very, very powerful set of information, and I hope each and every one of you felt the message that I was trying to bring to you. You noticed we used a particular word over and over again, and if you count it up in the script, you'll see that it's probably more times than I could even or do even care to mention, and that was the word control. Which brings us to our subject matter for today, ownership versus control. Now, you might ask, what was so important about this word control that basically the concept of the mission statement is centered around that particular aspect, the word control. In all my educational experience and background, this has to be the most important concept that I was taught. And it was also the first concept that was taught when I received my invitation to the academy. This aspect, this concept of ownership versus control. Once I learned this concept, developed how to utilize this concept, it seemed like everything that I touched turned to gold after that. I realized that in this country, ownership has very little to do with wealth. The vast majority of this wealth in this country is actually controlled and not owned. The elite of the wealthy in this country, most people don't realize they own very little, but they control a vast amount of wealth. Let's take a quick look at the difference between owning something and controlling something, having the control of something. First, if we look at the aspect of ownership, well, when you look at it just from the beginning, someone else makes decisions for you when you own something. And what do I mean by that? Some other entity, someone else, decides how much you can have. They also decide how long you can have it. The decision is made for you as far as when to even take it from you. If you didn't know by now, let me tell you. If you own it, it can be taken. If you own it, you are going to be heavily taxed on it. Now, listen to this. Our attorneys at one time shared with us, and they learned of this from attending and continuing education that attorneys go through, and they made a statement that your wealth belongs to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's attorney, not you. One more time. Your wealth belongs to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's attorney. Now let me put that into people language for you. Your wealth belongs to the person that is going to sue you and that person's attorney. And you know, we live in a lawsuit happy society today. So what ownership brings to you is recognition, a recognition of what you have, of your wealth, and the fact that someone else wants it. And if they want it and you own it, they have the ability through our legal system to obtain it from you. Now, if that isn't eye-opening, I don't know what could be. You have been born, raised, and bred to own this and own that. And, you know, you're not a man if you don't have that land. And this is the principle that your grandparents and great-grandparents, all the way up to your parents, have raised you in this concept. When in reality, personal ownership has very little to do with wealth. Personal ownership has very little to do with the accumulation of wealth. Personal ownership has little to do with the preservation of wealth. Personal ownership has little to do with the passing on of wealth. On the other hand, control of wealth is the absolute key to the accumulation, preservation, and passing on of wealth. I can remember when individuals absolutely thought that Bill Gates was the wealthiest person in the country. And what you are actually looking at is a gentleman that held his wealth in the public eye. There is a vast amount of wealth in this country that is held under a position of control, not ownership. Let me give you an example. The Rockefellers. Let's take this example. They transacted a $90 million sale of real estate, and there was absolutely no capital gains tax due on this real estate legally, by simply taking a building that has their name on it, Rockefeller Center Plaza, Inc. in New York, is actually owned by the Rockefeller Real Estate Trust. So the Rockefellers don't actually personally own the building. A trust owns it, and they control the trust. Now, a Japanese investment group wanted to purchase this building. So they placed $90 million into a trust and obtained control over the $90 million instead of owning the $90 million. So here we have two different entities. They own nothing, but they're controlling a vast amount. Rockefeller Center Plaza, Inc., that office complex, which is a multi-million-dollar complex, and then $90 million is being controlled, but neither of the entities own these items. Now, look at what they did. They simply switched board of trustees. The Japanese investment group took over control of the building, and the Rockefellers took over control of the $90 million, which were in the trust. So they switched board of trustees. That was a sale, legal, right up front of the IRS, the state, the government, and as you can imagine, the governor of New York was furious about that because he was definitely looking to get some tax revenue out of that. But look at how this sale was conducted. It was conducted through the control element of wealth and not the ownership. Now, if these families have been able to create wealth in this manner for generations upon generations, then you have to imagine it has to be quite a stress to truly believe that Bill Gates, with public wealth and how heavily it is taxed, could possibly be the wealthiest person in the country. Now, in applying this same concept of ownership versus control to my own real estate, it was amazing how the profitability of my real estate immediately turned over. I used to own rental properties, and in that ownership of rental properties, I had all of the headaches of rental properties, re-renting properties, having to evict tenants, having late rents, having them tear up my properties, monies expended on repairing the properties. Some of you out there that have been in rental properties, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So what I did is I took all of my rental properties and I turned them over to owner finance. So I sold them owner finance. Now, at that point, I did not own the property. I was the banker on the property. The family owned the property, so they were responsible for keeping the property up, which they did. And because I dealt with families that were in a position of being very grateful to have a home and to be able to be a homeowner and have the tax advantages of a homeowner, as I sat down and I shared those benefits with them, and banks would not work with them because they were on that marginal credit line. It also became an aspect of where the lights might have been turned off at that house, but they made that house payment every single month. I eliminated the re-renting headaches, the getting rents late, the having to fix up properties, evict people, by accepting a position of control versus owning those properties. I remember taking a credit card and I purchased 5 VA foreclosure homes, and we fixed those homes up and we put the down payment all on a credit card, and within a 60-day period we had all of those properties turned around and sold. The down payments paid off the credit cards, which we put the fix up on the credit cards, plus the down payments we had to make on these properties when we purchased them from the VA. So from the down payment, we were able to clear the credit cards, and we had probably a $4,000 or $5,000 a month cash flow from the payments coming in. Now, not at one moment did we actually own these properties. They were assumables. So we were able to assume, and then we were able to turn around and do a wrap and then immediately sell these properties. So once again, now our firm for the past 21 years has done nothing but buy and sell owner finance. When we created these notes, we found out that there was a huge market out there that would actually pay us cash for these notes that we had created. So whenever we needed a lump sum of cash for a particular project, we would just put a note on the market. So we effectively sold a piece of real estate without owning that piece of real estate. We had all of the benefits and advantages of a rental property without the headaches. And I can remember when we tried to sell one of our rentals and the months that it took to put it on the market and try to get it sold, versus now we were into a purely cash flow operation, cash in, cash out, and all the headaches had been eliminated from that point forward. So as you can see, the practical application of ownership versus control can be awfully profitable when you give up the hang up of, well, unless I own it, you know, it's not going to be profitable, or unless I own it, you know, I'm not successful. In reality, and of course, going back to our mission statement, a different economic reality, and we're looking at the reality of the situation of ownership versus control. In reality, You don't want to ever own anything. Not really, not when you think about it. You don't want to be in a position to where you have something and someone can come and take it from you. You just want to enjoy the benefit of that item, whatever it may be. So with control, you have the opportunity to enjoy the benefit of whatever that asset is without having the risk of ownership. So as you can see, I stress the word risk. All that you own is now at risk. It's at risk of heavy taxation. It's at risk of lawsuit. It's at risk of not being able to be passed on 100% to your children and on to their heirs. Only through accepting the reality of ownership versus control that we're sharing with you here today are you going to be able to release yourself from the risk that you live under. Families of wealth that have understood and practiced and taught this element of ownership versus control within their family units for generation upon generation, they have this little saying: well, you may not be able to take it with you, but you can sure control it from the grave. What does this really mean? By teaching their children how to maintain control over the family estate, those estates become larger and larger and larger, one generation after the next. Look at where the estates are now, where families only understood this one element about ownership. If you didn't own something, that meant that you were a failure. You were not a success in life. But the moment that they tried to pass on what they perceived as a successful life that they had built to their children, they found this element of ownership come in and swoop down on that estate, and their children ended up with 50% and even sometimes 2/3 of it going to the entities that really control. What did they do? They found out too late. It was not a wise thing for their parents to have owned their estate and then try to pass it on to their children. It would be more wise for them to have that estate positioned in a position of control where all that changed was the management of that particular estate. And that's what happened with the real estate deal with the Rockefellers. They only changed management of the 90 million and the real estate instead of ownership of the 90 million and the real estate. The ownership stayed right where it was. And of course, through CMI's teaching system, it is absolutely possible for you to position your estate, your business, your wealth, no matter how large, in a position of only having to change management. And when you look at this, a parent dies. Instead of having to deal with the issue of the courts intervening in your family's life, attorneys intervening in your family's lives, individuals that are out to appraise your property intervening in your family's life, all because of this ownership. And the government is coming in to decide what you will or will not keep. If that estate was in a position of control, then all the family would have to deal with is the mourning of the loss of a loved one. No intervention of attorneys or city or state or appraisers or real estate agents. It would only be a passing of management from one family member to the next. And that would already have been established as to who would head the family at the passing of the father, at the passing of the mother. I want you all to keep in mind and understand this. Someone always has control. The only question is, do you have control or do they have control? But believe me, someone always has control. As our mission statement shared with you, you know who the three primary entities are: your employer, the IRS, and our government. We just interjected a fourth one. That's the legal system. If you think that this is just a pie in the sky concept, wait until you find yourself in court, or wait until tax time. Or how about some of you have already experienced this when you've had a parent die, and look at the turmoil that your life was thrown into because your parents had not yet passed down this concept of ownership versus control to you. Think about this. How is your life now under someone else's control? How free are your actions or your movements? Are you where you want to be in your life at this point in time? The answer, more than likely, to that is no. If you look at why, it's because your employer decided that he wanted you to be right where you are at this point in your life. The IRS decided that they wanted you to be right where you are at this point in your life. And as long as you allow these other entities to maintain control, you will only move at their pace. And the only way you will move at the pace that is to the benefit and advantage of your family is to understand and find out how to obtain this control back into your hands. Understanding this difference between ownership and control and how to regain it has to be the most important and must become priority for your family to learn today, right now. Because the longer you do not accept the truth of the reality of ownership versus control, you will always, as I have said before, suffer the consequences. And the consequences are simply, look at where you are today. Is that where you had expected to be at this time in your life, anticipated to be at this time of your life, wanted to be at this time in your life? Our intent of instilling in your family this concept of gaining control versus ownership even extends to CMI, because our whole aspect of our teachings is that, yes, in the beginning we have to maintain control over our families in CMI to teach them how to obtain control for themselves. But all of our materials are put together so that at one point in time, you will not even need CMI. So even we won't have the control over you. Now, how many times have you ever worked with a company whose goal was to put you in a position of wealth separate of this company, to where you were in total control of your financial position? Now, does your job ever look to release you from their control? Their control over you is how they obtain and create and perpetuate their wealth. The moment they release control of you, they release control of that source of wealth. In CMI, it's quite different. Our whole job is to boot you out of here as quickly as possible to get another class through here and teaching them and bringing them to the same state of reality. Yes, our control exists to a point of educating you, because we have to get you to think outside of the box, not bring in your old concepts that you learned from your parents, that you learned from school, that you learned from college. All of those mentors in the past were about study, work hard, get a job, work for somebody else, let somebody else make the decisions for you. Now you come into CMI and it says work and learn how to make your own decisions and take control of your own family's choices for life. So as we guide you through our educational system, do know that at one point we know that you will be able to break away from us and you will be able to perpetuate your family's wealth from the foundation of knowledge that you obtain through our teaching system. I bet this is different than any other type of economic lecture or information or knowledge that you've ever been exposed to this point. Have you ever asked yourself why? Because I can imagine you have never been expected to, or had you ever intended to be educated to this level. Up to this point, you have only been educated to a certain level to keep you under control. Our attempts is to raise the bar, is to take the cap off and put in front of you the rest of the story. Make no mistake, evidence of the truth of what I'm sharing with you about ownership versus control, and if you ever expect to achieve the level of wealth in your life that you dream about, you're going to have to accept the concept of I have to give up the ownership and accept control, so I'm not putting my future at risk. So I'm not putting my children's future at risk. And the moment that you come to that realization of control is absolutely better, because if I control it and I don't own it, nobody can take it from me. I can't be heavily taxed on it. No one can tell me how much I'm allowed to pass on to my children. Nobody can take part of what I want to go on to my children. Not accepting this truth, of course, you are saying I am willing to suffer the consequences. What are the consequences? Think about this. Are you where you want to be in your career, in your family life, in your charitable pursuits, in your life goals? CMI has the resources, resolve, and intent to return control of a family's financial destiny back to the family and out of the hands of your employer, the IRS, and our government. It's your turn. It's your time. Through our teaching system, regain control. Regain the prosperity, security, and longevity for your family. Take advantage of what already exists out there for you, and families of elite wealth have used to preserve the very principles of God, family, and country for their families. It's your turn. It's your time. Thank you once again.